Hey teachers, we know things are just nuts right now with the holidays approaching. You have got your hands full between your own life, your family, your students, whatever on earth is going on at school. Grade report's going to be due soon. We just know this time of year is so challenging. So to give back to our teachers, we are doing a very limited time Thanksgiving Black Friday sale. And this sale is so simple. It is one coupon you can use on anything you want. That's right. We are issuing basically a blank check to our listeners, and this coupon is good for 50% off anything. You heard me, literally anything. If you are listening and you use this coupon in the next 48 hours, I'm talking about before the end of the weekend, you can take 50% off any one item that you've had your eye on in the Brave New Teaching world. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to shop.bravenewteaching.com and you're going to use the coupon code 50 on any. 50 on O-N any. A-N-Y. 50 on any, and you can go and get whatever you've had your eye on for 50% off. I hope that you get a chance to use it. I hope that whatever you find brings you joy, peace, organization, and just a happier year ahead. Let's get on to the show. Well, hello. Welcome back to Brave New Teaching. Hi, everyone. This is Amanda, and I am one of the hosts of the Brave New Teaching podcast. And today I am here, yes, solo, but I am here to finish a series that we began about 3 weeks ago. And we are focusing these 3 episodes in a row all on the art of analysis, because it truly is an art to not only perform the act of analysis, but to teach adolescents how to analyze. It is not only do they not actually teach you how to do this in undergrad, but learning how to teach children and teenagers how to analyze, that is an art and a feat all of its own. And so we really wanted to dedicate some specialized, highly nuanced, highly specific episodes to this topic. And so today's episode hopefully kind of will end us on a lighter note of all kind of like the serious and in-depth things that we've talked about for the first 2 parts of this series. Today's is meant to bring back some play and some fun. And that's really kind of our third goal with teaching analysis, is to play, is to have fun and make it a game, especially when we talk about the phrase practice, right? Practicing the art of analysis. It is something, right? To analyze a text is something that takes a lot of practice. And so what happens, and what a lot of us are finding, is that practicing it can be extremely dull, repetitive, and it's difficult. So if a difficult task is consistently paired with pain and unenjoyable things, we're going to have a really hard time getting through to students. Not even, right? Forget the point that I don't think kids immediately even understand the point. It's one thing to teach them something hard, but they can kind of see the long-term benefits. I don't think that becomes apparent to our students maybe ever in their high school careers. I think hopefully as adults, they understand, why we taught them to break things down, why we taught them to pay attention to the details, how we taught them to notice patterns and add things together and group things together. Hopefully they notice that, right, once they're, long past our courses. But the chances are is that we don't even have that working for us. We are working against a lot of things. So I really think that today's episode all about fun and gamifying, and I mean gamifying. I'll explain later, but I don't mean that in a cheap edutainment kind of a way. But really focusing on how we can do analysis more often, but make it light, make it fun, and make it something that we look forward to practicing on repeat. The better. So that's our focus for today. If you have not listened to the first 2 episodes in this series, you certainly can listen to this one as a standalone and then go back and listen to the others. They don't need to be consecutive. So just make sure that you make time for all 3, because I do think that your knowledge and your skill as a teacher will definitely layer, right? When these 3 episodes, I think, layer together to give you a more complete understanding and game plan for tackling analysis in your classroom. And we really are looking at both literary analysis and rhetorical analysis. I think that both of these are incredibly challenging and need to be taught at every single level. I would love to see rhetorical analysis started at 7th and 8th grade, can then continued through high school. We do that with a literary analysis, but we don't always do that with rhetorical. So let's jump into gamifying, making fun, and having a good time with the art of analysis, part 3 of 3. Cue the music. You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
Okay, so I have to begin with something that those of you messaged me about from the second episode in this series. So last week, or depending on what order you're listening to these in, during the second episode of this series, we talked about visual tactics for teaching analysis, and I kind of dropped a hint of an activity for Gatsby that I never actually got around to explaining. It wasn't that I forgot, believe it or not, but I actually just kind of decided it wasn't worth explaining on the podcast, but some of you were like, I want to hear anyway. So if you missed that episode, don't worry about this next couple of minutes. It'll make sense when you go back and listen. But I had talked about mapping our visual analysis, right? That was kind of our tactic, was to use maps. And so when I was talking about chapter 7 in Gatsby, what I do there, right? So like, it's not, the reason I kind of backed off is because it's not actually a map. What I do for chapter 7 in Gatsby, and I can show this to you. If you want to send me an email or you want to send me a message, I'd be happy to show it to you. If you have my Gatsby unit from TPT, you can just go to chapter 7, you'll see it. But basically what I do is I blow up a giant plot diagram and treat chapter 7 as its own plot arc, from exposition to rising actions to climax to falling actions, right? All of that exists within one chapter. And so the kind of like take the idea of close reading and also analysis, I blow up this giant map into all of the parts. So on one page is just the exposition. So I have kind of a straight line, and then students can add pictures and text to describe the exposition. Then the next full 8.5 by 11 page is a diagonal line that is rising action number 1. Then I have another page that's another diagonal line that's the next rising action. So basically the kids kind of put together the pieces of the plot diagram, and I'm using air quotes, map, to see the rising and falling of all the things going on in chapter 7. So while it's not technically a map that we were talking about with the Grace Year, it's still a way of kind of expanding and contracting, right, our analysis and giving kids a focal point. So if you're in a small group, you have a certain section, right? That's our way of narrowing things down. And then there's certain things that we're looking for, right? We're only paying attention to symbolism, temperature, and maybe one other thing, and looking at the impact of those literary devices on tension. How are those things being used in order to create tension? And so students are able to basically trace the way that tension is built, released, and then it comes all the way back again together again at the end. It's a way for them to visually track how that happens. So that's my clarifying moment of what I meant by my map, even though it isn't actually a map. Okay, so let's carry on into games. So I have two games I'd like to describe to you in kind of in detail. I'll give you the details, but the broad advice I want to share in terms of gamifying any type of analysis is to use hyperbole. The more exaggerated the activity, I think it automatically will become fun, right? When we come up with these kind of extreme scenarios that seem kind of over the top and ridiculous, that is one of the easiest ways that I have found to get buy-in from kids. When we put, like, we're just talking about Gatsby, we talk about if we're gonna do some literary analysis of Gatsby, I give them scenarios, right, every now and again. This is not the game, but this is kind of like the broad overview, right, of using hyperbole and using exaggeration, right? Like, what if is a great phrase to use for this. What if Gatsby and Daisy were not in New York, but they were in Paris, and the light at the end of the dock wasn't green, it was yellow? Then what? Right? And they kind of like let it be. These like hyperbolized, fictional, right? Totally like seemingly random changes can force kids into the analysis seat in a way that doesn't feel like work. It feels like using their imagination. Oh, okay. Well, what if this doesn't, it doesn't matter. This is just for fun. That's the guise I like to use for literary analysis, is to kind of play with setting or play with some of these kind of exaggerated or ridiculous scenarios. I like to do the same thing with rhetorical analysis. And the best way for me to accomplish that with students has always been to start with fictional scenarios to teach argument and rhetorical analysis. So if you've been around the podcast for a while, or if you followed me forever, you know that one of the first lessons I always start with is teaching Beauty and the Beast's Be My Guest, or Be Our Guest, excuse me. And so if I really want kids to get good at analyzing argument, it's helpful to put them in a scenario that doesn't feel too serious. But at the same time, we can really get invested in. And so the scenario of Lumiere, right? He's our character. He is our speaker. He is the one who has been cursed wrongfully as a candelabra for the rest of his life. Poor Lumiere. He's done nothing wrong. But he is the kind of leader of this band of furniture pieces, former servants, that are all cursed and would like to survive. They would prefer to live. And Lumiere has an opportunity to convince Belle to stick around the castle. He has to first get her to stay. He can't convince her to love the beast to begin with. So Be Our Guest is all about convincing her to stick around and enjoy herself, forget about her problems, and just give this castle a chance. And so I'm not going to go into all the details here. I will link stuff for you in the show notes. But by giving students the chance to, number one, feel like they're watching a Disney sing-along, right? Makes them, again, feel like, oh, this isn't work. This is fun. That's a great place to start. Then once we've kind of got them in that seat, we can start to introduce things like speaker, audience, message, right? All of these things, the context, all those components of Space Cat. That really, really helps. So giving students fictional scenarios or hyperbolized scenarios to do their analysis from that spot is a really powerful kind of overview strategy that you can use pretty versatile with a lot of versatility. And hopefully that's helpful advice in general. Then I want to talk about our two games. So the two games I'm going to share with you today are available for purchase, but I also think that you are extraordinarily capable of making your own versions of these. I just have some that are already pre-made if you just need to see what they look like and go for it. So, one of my favorite games that I ever played with my students, I just recently got them kind of created and listed to actually share with other teachers, but we played it forever in like the sloppiest, least controlled or organized kind of way. And I called it Rhetoric Roll the Dice. And Rhetoric Roll the Dice is an exercise that gets students to really pay attention to the relationship between the speaker, the audience, and the message. So in Rhetoric Roll the Dice, we begin with you guessed it, fictional scenario. So I have a few that I've listed. One of them is a scenario where the US women's rugby team is given an opportunity to start using social media and kind of partnering with a brand. And if they are going to take on this brand deal, each of the players and all the kind of stakeholders in this agreement would have to take on certain responsibilities that would both benefit them and kind of tax their time or maybe take their time away from paying attention to the game. I was inspired so much by Ilona Mayer and her incredible social media presence through the Olympics in 2024 and her continued presence. I mean, she's just such a beast. She is strong, gorgeous, hilarious, and such an interesting person to watch in social media. It's so interesting to me to watch how she uses her platform. So I thought, okay, this would be a great place to go for our kids for fiction. Not only do they love their own social media, but they love sports. And this gives them a chance to kind of think about, okay, what are the pros and the cons of accepting a brand deal and taking on the responsibilities of promoting a brand and using social media, but also being a public figure? And so once we've kind of got the scenario set, there are then 6 stakeholders. I choose 6 because I think it usually is like a nice small group size. I'd like to, divide my class into 6. And what happens is once the kids in their group roll the dice, that dice number corresponds with a speaker. And so they become that person. Then they pass the dice along and they keep rolling the dice till every group has their assigned speaker. Obviously, if you roll the dice and that speaker is already taken, you roll the dice again, right? So on and so forth. So each group gets their assigned speaker, and each speaker or stakeholder is somehow invested in this scenario. So in this one that I'm explaining to you, we have a couple of players, we have a captain, we have the general manager, right? We have these different people involved. Then once the groups are formed, from their task is to write an argument that would benefit them, right? Kind of in the roles I've given them, I've also kind of given them a little overview of their perspective and kind of the things that they would prefer and kind of what they believe in. So they're given a full character description. And so their goal is to write an argument to propose to whoever the decision or the deciding person, whoever that is. They need to write this for the decider. And along the way, we're going to need to keep rolling the dice because in their argument, they're going to roll the dice for a rhetorical appeal. Whatever they roll on will be the appeal that's matched with that number. So let's say they roll a 3. That means that they must use a combination of ethos and logos. Then they're going to roll the dice again. That's going to give them a rhetorical choice. So let's say they roll the dice and they get a 5. That means they also need to use a rhetorical question. And then they're going to roll the dice finally for a tone word. So cat, or when we talk about space cat would be our choices, appeals, and tone. So now they've rolled the dice, not only to figure out their speaker, but now to see what the things are that they are forced to use in their argument. A choice, an appeal, and a tone that must appear in their argument. So what we've done is we've created a ton of constraints. And constraints are deceptive. We use this a lot in creative writing as well. Sometimes the more constrained kids feel, the more it feels like a game, a puzzle, something that they have to figure out. And it's also something that they can blame If their argument's not that quote unquote good, they can kind of release the responsibility, release the pressure of having to write something amazing because, oh, well, I had to use this or I had to use this. And I was trying to do this and I was trying to do that. And that's what we want. I want it to be messy. I want it to be imperfect. I want them to just try to piece these things together, and then I want to get to the end, right? So they do this, right? They write their speeches. They have to present them. Sometimes they get a little bit ridiculous, and that's great, right? Remember, we're talking about games and play, because a lot of the benefit that we actually see is not just the process. We really value the process. The product, okay. If the product comes out and the product has flaws, which it inevitably will, this gives us a ton of opportunity to ask to explain what they would have done differently. So, okay, let's say that you didn't roll a 3. You didn't have to use a rhetorical question. What would you have used instead? And at that point, because they've been processing for so long, they'll be like, oh, I had the best idea for a metaphor, but I couldn't use it. And like, awesome, right? Because if they have a blank slate all the time and they're always creating from zero, that's a lot of brain power. That's really, really challenging. And we're asking them to do that a lot. So to mix it up in this way, to give them these constraints, to give them these kind of really tight lane lines, it gives them a chance to bounce around and figure out how to solve a problem rather than to just show up and constantly create from thin air all the time. So this is a wonderful game. The rugby example is fun. I have one where the kids are trying to save a haunted house. Basically, in this scenario, someone attended the haunted house and she tripped because the scarer scared her too well and she fell down, and then she's threatening this lawsuit, and the haunted house, all the staff and the employees and the workers are trying to save their haunted house. And so they're trying to make their appeals to do that. There's just so many. I have a couple, I have a one about employees in the kitchen, and there's a reviewer coming in, but the kitchen just lost power. And what are they going to do? That one you can pair with an episode of The Bear or something if you wanted to. I have a Valentine's Day floral disaster. I have a Bridgerton inspired theme with dresses and balls and you name it. Like, you guys can do this. You can make your own. You can get the ones that I have, whatever you want. But the idea is lean heavy on the fiction, the hyperbole, the ridiculous, then give them constraints. Have them roll the dice, have them pick out of a hat, have them whatever it might be. You can make digital spinners online really easily and make it have to spin to get these things. So easy. And let them play. Let them play, watch the process, and don't stress so much about product all the time. These opportunities give you that chance to experiment with process and not obsess over product. Okay, our final game to wrap up today's episode. Let's talk about the Spare Change game show. So Spare Change game show, as it is more of an argumentation game than an analysis game, but I will explain to you the ways that I have adapted it to be more focused on textual analysis. Spare Change game show is really simple. You need a coin and you need some scenarios, and that's really it. So in this case, we'll take a seasonal idea, right? So let's take winter. What the kids will do for the Spare Change game show is that either in pairs or small groups, we'll just discuss pairs for this situation, and then I can give you some other ways of doing it. So I have 2 students and a coin. The heads person is yes, the tails person is no. At the center of the table or on the screen or between the 2 children somewhere is a statement. And the student who flips I don't even remember what I just said, whatever it was, whoever flips the yes side must take the yes argument, and whoever the other person then must take the no argument. So let's say the statement says, winter travel destinations are far superior to summer travel destinations. Okay, period. It's a claim. And now the goal is for the opposing sides to develop their argument to support the claim. So you can hear how this is mostly grounded in argumentation, right? Reasoning, kind of finding that line of reasoning to support the claim. So this works really well, I think, for me, if we're going to use it in terms of literary analysis with a novel. So you could have a character based statement that is rooted kind of in characterization, or it's rooted in maybe symbolism, or it's rooted in the setting. If you root the claim statement in a literary device or a literary analysis component that you've been studying, that will send students back to the text to analyze and pull apart details to make their argument. So that works really well. So what the difference is, right? If you're going to practice argument on its own, kids don't necessarily need to go back to the text. If you're going to practice analysis, the claim statement sends them back in. So again, even with rhetorical analysis, whatever the text is maybe that you're looking at, maybe you're looking at the Declaration of Independence, right? And you make a statement that says the Declaration of Independence is inherently biased toward blank, right? Whatever you're going to say. Then that forces students to go back into the text to find evidence to support that claim. What's brilliant about this kind of a game is that there's virtually no equipment needed. All you need to prep ahead of time are the statements, and it's brilliant. So I love to use this at like the conclusion or a midpoint of something that you're reading or studying to get kids to really revisit that work and revisit that text. So the way that you can finagle it with more than 2 kids is to have students on teams, and then each time they send a different spokesperson to the center to be the person who's arguing. You can also do this in just pairs around the room, kind of like speed dating. And every pair is just having their own conversation. You won't get to hear all of the arguments, but that may or may not matter to you. You could do it in a way that students have to write something down first before they argue, so that you can actually have them turn something into you at the end of the activity. This actually, pardon me, I've not done it, but it could work with an online platform like Parlay Ideas. I would love to use this with Parlay and speed dating. I think it could really work nicely. Even something as simple as a Google form. Kids could fill out their a Google form each time they take on a new argument, that could require them to submit some textual evidence that got them thinking the way that they were thinking. But really, remember, the goal here isn't necessarily for you to micromanage the work all the time. You can collect things if you need to collect things. I get it. Sometimes that is just part of classroom management, is kids need to submit something, and that's just kind of how they roll. I've been there, and that has definitely been something that has worked for me as well. But I really think for us, when we're playing and we're gamifying something, the more we can build up a culture of students doing the work and knowing and understanding that the value is in the process, not in the submission, that's where we eventually want to be. And we might not be there right now. That might be an end of the year thing, and that's okay. Everyone listening here, you have students at different maturity levels, different reading levels, different experience levels, and that's a decision for you to make. But I'm also here to give you permission to kind of let things be sometimes, as long as kids are on task and as long as kids are doing what they're asked. It's okay to just let them discuss without having to prove anything to you, especially when we talk about analysis. And that brings us back to kind of where we started, which is let them play, value the process over the product, and create these spaces, right? It's one thing to say, I value your process, but then to keep collecting stuff and grading everything. So, that's kind of a nice little check-in for us too, is, are my actions matching up with my beliefs? Are my actions matching up with what I'm actually saying to students? This is a really powerful piece of moving forward in a critical thinking centered classroom. Is kids need time just to think. I kind of try to remind myself, this is the equivalent of all of the paperwork that admin makes me do. instead of just letting me teach. That's what I try to remember, is that there are a lot of kids who are just trying to learn, but are so turned off and so exhausted by how often we're forcing them to prove it to us by filling out paperwork that sometimes that might be like kind of an invisible angst, or maybe a very visible angst, that might be kind of a barrier to some of this deeper and more challenging type of analytical thinking. I know for me, even as a student, like a good student, sometimes I didn't even trust myself if I wasn't submitting something, right? Or I kind of got addicted to like needing constant feedback because I thought that, if I just did something, was it worth something if no one was looking at it? And so I think about those kids as well, the ones who are going to fill out the work. What are they learning from that constant kind of micromanaging? So, like I said, your room, your balance, your decisions. But I hope that you've been given some permission today to have fun, to play games, to be lighthearted, to maybe be a little bit ridiculous, use hyperbole, to make everyone's lives more enjoyable and fun. And if you need to sit down and brainstorm and chat with me about some stuff, I would love to do that. I am opening up some coaching spots in the new year of 2025, and I would be happy to do that with you. I would really enjoy that, actually. So please send me a DM, send me an email. I've got some links on my website too if you want to go that direction. And I'm also currently booking out my schedule for 2025 for doing in-person professional development at schools across the US and internationally. And I'm really looking forward to some of the stops that are already lined up for 2025. It looks like Arizona is going to be the first place that I go, which is very exciting because it's so warm and it is going to be so cold here in February. So anyway, I am thrilled to continue to do this work with you all. Have a wonderful week. And I am so excited to hear what new ideas you have and what suggestions you have, pardon me, for any new series we have coming up on the podcast. I look forward to joining you all with Marie on our next episode. She'll be back rocking and rolling with us. And if you enjoyed this series, please send us a note. Let us know if you want to hear more things like this. We'd love to know. We are always kind of wondering, do we go more narrow? Do we go more broad? What do people really need right now? And what we really need is your input. So after you leave us a review on iTunes, head over to your email, head over to your DMs, and let us know how things are going on your end. And we will talk to you there. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and take it easy. Bye-bye. Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.